Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Access Vikings podcast. I'm Emily Leiker, joined by Andrew Krammer and Ben Goessling, all of us of the Minnesota Star Tribune. It's rainy today, but it was almost 90 degrees yesterday when we were out at TCO Performance Center for our second day of viewing OTAs. It was the fourth day of OTAs overall. I got a sunburn. Justin Jefferson kept himself protected from the sun with a very shady, super cool pair of Oakley sunglasses, and gave us a lot of intel on kind of the development or the evolution he's had in his leadership over the past year that I thought was some of the most interesting stuff we've heard this offseason. So let's start with Ben. Just what stood out to you about kind of some of Jefferson's remarks and what we heard from him?
Yeah, I mean, the talk about needing to be there more often and, kind of where that came from. I mean, even just, Kevin O'Connell telling him, hey, we need you here more, and him responding to that, I thought was interesting because it reflects certainly the fact that they have a young quarterback that he needs to bond with and get some chemistry built up with. But there's also, I think, a level of understanding that Justin Jefferson and the role he plays in the building. I mean, I think Kevin O'Connell called him an energy igniter, I think was the phrase. And we've heard Kevin O'Connell use that about people before, but there's very much, they talk about JJ McCarthy that way as well. And I think there's an effort to build the franchise, the identity of that locker room around that connection. I think they want this to be something that is productive for the next, 5 to 10 years at least. I mean, I'm sure they would be happy if it's closer to 10 than 5. And that obviously depends on people's careers and how they age and all of those kinds of things. But I think they feel like that pairing can be awfully productive for quite a while. And they want to kind of embody or have emboldened that, I should say, to have it, kind of take every expression that it possibly can in that locker room, from how they play on the field to how they just kind of make that roster their own. So I think a lot of the kind of not mandate for Jefferson, but the fairly strong encouragement that you need to be here even more than you otherwise would be comes from that place of saying, let's build this thing to whatever we can make it. And, kind of let these two be the ones that set the tone for that whole locker room. And it's easier to do that if they're both there and they're spending time together this early on.
Yeah. And Ben, they have lockers right next to each other, right?
Yeah. Yep. They do. Yeah. And that stuff, when they do that, it's not an accident. I mean, I think that's certainly something they want to have, happen organically when those two are near each other as much as they are. And they're both fairly gregarious people. So I think it kind of just happens naturally. But yes, I think that is, when that is set up that way, I'm sure it's somebody said, let's make sure these two are spending a lot of time together.
Yeah, and Emily, it stood out to me reading your story just and hearing from Harrison Phillips yesterday too. We talk about McCarthy, and he's not just trying to do that with Justin; he's trying to do that with everybody. And yeah. I think he went as far as to say this guy's confidence, McCarthy's, reminds me of Josh Allen in Buffalo, and how he knew himself to be a young leader and the power he held in the organization and all that. So McCarthy takes that obviously just as seriously, and it's important, like we're talking, that Jefferson does as well.
Yeah, and Justin had a similar quote. Like, I asked him where he saw the most growth in McCarthy's leadership, and he kind of had a similar thing without the Josh Allen comparison to what Harrison Phillips said, where like it was basically JJ really understands what his role is on this team as QB1, which makes sense, right? Like, he was QB1 at Michigan, where that's a very strong title to bear. He's a national champion. Like, it shouldn't surprise us at all that he understands that. But he is 22 years old, and like it's difficult to be a 22-year-old leader of sometimes guys that are up to like 10, 12 years older than you, if not more than that. I don't know how old Harry is at this point. How old is Harrison Smith? 36? Old?
Yes.
That sounds right.
That sounds right. Okay. Yeah. So up to 14 years older than you. And I think I had a similar thought writing yesterday about Justin, because it's easy to forget, I think, because of his stardom, because of the fact he's been in the league 5 years, he's still only 25 years old. And so, yes, it sounds kind of crazy that he's just come into this recognition that he holds influence and sway over this team. But I would get that. Like, you're in a locker room with guys who have been in the league 5 years longer than you, who have similar not quite to the same tier level of accomplishments but are accomplished and stuff. So that was like an interesting, just to hear him kind of say that that's a new revelation for him. But I do think like checks out when you look at like the composition of this team, the other guys that are in the locker room and how veteran some of them are, and the fact that he is still being asked to be this guy for the Vikings.
Yeah, and it's a natural step for Justin that started O'Connell's really. And Ben, we've talked about this, how O'Connell's slowly tried to bring this out of him, making him a team captain, or I mean, players voted, but obviously approving the fact that he's going to be was going to be a team captain. I can't remember if that was last year or 2 years ago for the first time. And just seeing kind of that growth come out of him where, he's not late to meetings from time to time just because he can be or whatever. Like those little things that kind of slip by when you're a superstar, and they can, kind of tightening those things up as you get older. And yeah, it's easy to forget that this guy's only 25 years old. Now his new quarterback is just 22.
Speaking of the veterans on the team, we did also hear from Harrison Phillips yesterday, which we alluded to. And he also he always is a very intriguing person to listen to, is pretty good about getting us in on the X's and O's and really delving into stuff with us. But Andrew, what stood out to you most from what he had to say? A lot of it about obviously new additions on the D-line, but then also just kind of the outlook for this team going into 2025.
Yeah, Harrison was lauding everybody from the scouting staff to the owners for the offseason that they had. I think he was as happy as anybody to see Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave get signed, because he admitted like that could probably take some run off me a little bit. We're only 2 years removed when he was playing 74% of the snaps. It was the most by a Vikings defensive tackle since Kevin Williams in 2012. Guys just don't do that unless you're that level of player. And we all love Harrison. I don't think anybody's saying he's Kevin Williams. So to bring in these two Pro Bowlers to put next to him, he kind of envisions more of that rotation. And it's not just those guys. It's Taki Taimani. It's Jalen Redmond, who will probably be the first guy off the bench. It's Levi Drake Rodriguez as well. It's Tyrion Ingrid Dawkins, who they took in the 5th round. These guys, they envision creating, as Harrison said, waves. And that sounds great in May and June, but Ben, we know how hard it is for them to actually achieve that, because once you get playing, once it becomes week 5, week 10, and you need to win games, you're going to put your top talent out there. And if those waves aren't proving themselves, it's really easy for coaches to pull back on it. So we'll see what happens, but it sounds nice, and it sounds like they've got what they hope is going to be a deep rotation.
Yeah, that bench tends to get shorter if guys are not playing well. And we've heard a lot of talk about defensive line depth and having guys fresh over the years. And then you look back on it. I mean, some of the Mike Zimmer years were, okay, everybody's still playing 900 snaps, and there wasn't much of a change there. So it is a matter of having guys in those supplementary roles that can be at least, they can be replacement level players or maybe a little bit better than that, because they're not, you're not getting the drop off when you put those guys in to the point where Brian Flores says, well, this idea of a rotation, this idea of depth is nice, but if we have a big drop off here, it just doesn't work. I mean, it's no different than basketball, where it's, well, we want to have an 8-9 man rotation, but if the backup point guard can't run the offense, we can't afford to have things go dormant for 5 minutes just so that the first guy can get a blow. So it does become a lot of those things where you have to have players behind that first group that can hack it. And especially when you have older players in that front and guys coming off of injuries like Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave you need some of that depth to earn its keep. And I think they liked a lot of what they saw. I mean, Kevin O'Connell, I think, gave a game ball to Jalen Redmond towards the end of the season. They praised Levi Drake Rodriguez quite a bit. Tyrion Ingrid Dawkins, I think, is somebody they are pretty excited about where he can maybe fit in as a rotational pass rusher. Taki Taimani is a guy that makes the team as an undrafted free agent. So there's enough there that they like that I expect those players will find roles. But there's a difference between, finding a role for a few snaps and being reliable enough that you could take a significant number of snaps off of somebody. I mean, 15 to 20 a game is a lot more than playing 5 in a couple of situations. So I think that is where you need to see the improvement from that second group that can help make that actually a reality. I think there's a lot of hope for it, and I think there's probably reason to believe it can happen, but that's where it's going to come out in the next 3-4 months in terms of whether this can become something they actually do, it's going to depend on the development of those players.
Yeah, we see the best defensive lines. Emily, we saw Philly do it every year. San Francisco, when they were at their best, do it. A team like Detroit gets undone because they get worn down and don't have those bodies anymore. So the best teams that play farthest have those waves, and the Vikings would like to think they're at that point right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think defensive line is always the first kind of brick to crumble on a team, especially late in the season. So if they do have enough to keep those waves going, even if they start with 3 waves and drop down to 2 by the back half of the season, like I think that's still a lot better than some of what you were seeing last year in terms of that kind of progression for them.
I mean, the other thing to remember here, too, is that to win a Super Bowl, you are more likely than ever to have to play 21 games to do it. I mean, that the additional game in the regular season, plus the fact that only one team in each conference gets a bye now, means you are more likely to have to play 4 playoff games to win a Super Bowl or even get to a Super Bowl than you ever have been. It's no longer the case where, okay, there are 4 teams that get byes, and they both have division round playoff games at home, and they're probably going to win, and then they're going to play in a conference title game. It's not this, let's play 2 playoff games, then we get a 2-week break, and then the Super Bowl. In a lot of cases, I mean, at least one of the teams playing in the conference title game every single year is going to be playing its 20th game that matters in that season by the time they get to the conference title game. So you have to have I think this rotation becomes more important than ever when you just think about the accumulation of snaps that actually matter, the accumulation of times where it's guys slamming into each other and the cumulative load of that and the wear and tear it exacts on a body. I mean, you have to find ways to take some of those things off of players, or it's just more likely than ever, no matter how good your strength training plan is, no matter how good your training room is, your rehab programs, your ways to get guys turned over, all of those things, there is a limit to how frequently somebody can take that kind of a pounding and then come back and be as effective as they were in September. So the more you have it, I think the more important it becomes, given the way the NFL is set up in the modern era. It is a war of attrition. You hear players talk about that a lot. And in that particular spot, I think it's as clear as ever that's where we're going.
And I speaking of Harrison, I also found it interesting. The backdrop of all this was him talking about in our exit meetings back in January. There was just this notion and kind of the conversation being about how we need to get, his phrasing, I think, was like, we need to get like-minded individuals in here who already know what success looks like. So we don't have to build that foundation again. And it's like every offseason, it felt like we kept losing enough people that we'd have to rebuild this foundation and rebuild. And it felt like we weren't stacking and getting to that next step of our process here. And so that was part of why he said that he felt like the ownership and the front office wanted to bring in these veteran guys and Hargrave and Allen. Hargrave being to 2 Super Bowls with Philly and San Francisco and not winning either of them. And obviously Allen being a Pro Bowl for years in Washington. So they feel like that this is kind of that natural step for this entire organization, which makes it all the more fascinating that you've got a young quarterback in the middle of all of it, not unlike a Trey Lance way back in the day when San Francisco felt so ready to go win it.
Shout out to Harrison Phillips for using the phrase like-minded individuals in Minnesota, by the way. A very subtle shout out to Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation, which of course was recorded in the Twin Cities with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. So I don't think that's what he was going for, but very local presence on brand there for Harrison Phillips.
Emily, this is what we needed when we were talking about halftime shows, being like, I don't know music.
Get it. I don't know. I mean, they had Justin Timberlake for the Super Bowl. Let's bring it back around. I don't know.
I think I just read a headline about Janet recently. Anyway, we'll come back with that. That would be crazy.
Janet, that would be awesome. Sign me up for that.
Anyway, I was going to say, and yeah, the part about the like-minded individuals and the organization, like really trying to keep from having to like reset the foundation of this team, I think also ties back to what we were talking about with Jefferson and him being asked to be here in OTAs instead of not arriving until next week for minicamp or even later than that, and being here so that instead of, okay, we're building up, and then, oh, we got to add our star player back in here, guys are going to lose reps, whatever, move everything around. Like they have started with pretty much the whole team, which we'll get into. There's a couple more faces present that we had missed out on seeing last week, but like they have pretty much the whole team here, whole team bought in, at least in terms of presence, right? We don't know about mentality and all that yet, but of being present here for OTAs and putting in this work now, which I think speaks to, again, the type of people that they brought in. Isaiah Rodgers is one of those faces that we did see yesterday for the first time. We hadn't seen him last week. I believe, Ben, you were the one that talked to him. Andrew, then You wrote about him. He said last week wasn't an injury thing. He just happened to be absent. What else did you hear from him, Ben? And then Andrew, what stood out when you went and listened back?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that he, I think understands the level of playmaking ability there is in this defense. I mean, that was one of the things that stuck out to him when he was thinking about signing here, was the fact that this group had more interceptions than any team in the NFL last year. And I think he realizes with the pass rushing and the different blitz packages that they throw at quarterbacks, there are going to be more throws where quarterbacks are either under duress or trying to figure out what it is they're processing. And that leads to mistakes, that leads to overthrows, that leads to things that are behind a receiver because they may be a step late. I think it creates opportunities for guys to make plays. And he said his ball skills are one of his best attributes as a corner. We certainly saw some of that yesterday when he has that interception on JJ McCarthy. Looked like kind of a corner route that he was trying to squeeze between two defenders, and Isaiah Rodgers is playing underneath it and picks it off, kind of cover two corner kind of look there. But it was interesting to hear his thought process on some of these things because there's been a lot of excitement about him. I mean, Kevin O'Connell talked about this at the owners' meetings. Brian Flores' excitement about Isaiah Rodgers and what he can be as a cover corner. And, everybody kind of talks about, well, okay, he's only 5'9". And that is, I think it's a valid point because you don't see a lot of corners, especially man corners, and he may not be playing as much man. It may be more of a zone kind of look for him. But the fact that they are trusting him outside to allow Byron Murphy to play inside more often, I think they are of the belief that he can be effective even at his size in this defense. And I think the ball skills are one of the things that he feels like will be a lot of the reason that can happen.
Yeah, and just watching him, Ben brings up the interception too. He was returning kicks as well for them, which will be interesting after, I think Ty Chandler did most of that last year. I can't quite remember because they didn't return too many kicks, but now the league wants to incentivize those. And so if there are more, Isaiah Rodgers might be doing more than just starting at corner. And yeah, he was getting all the first team reps opposite Byron Murphy in this first OTA that we saw him there. And he just looks fast. When you read up on him, he apparently ran like a late 4.2 or 4.3 at his pro day.
It was like 4.2 high.
A small, speedy guy, yeah. And they're trying to add different, almost like with the receiver room, different skill sets. Where you got Okudah, who's kind of more of a longer, press guy, and is giving receivers a different challenge than a smaller, speedier guy like Rodgers. And we'll see how it shakes out in terms of how they actually play the position, because they led the NFL in interceptions last year, where their third corner, Shaq Griffin, was very up and down to the point where, they're playing more of that 3 safety look, which this year would be more on Theo Jackson. So there's another fascinating element to how their secondary is going to shake out. But I think Rodgers is, as Ben has been saying really since March, it seems like he's going to play quite a big role, and it might not just be on defense.
Gold gloves and gold cleats, so he was really easy for us to spot yesterday.
He's replacing the Najee Thompson role of all the gold stuff. Yeah,
both on the field and then when we're trying to track down faces that we haven't seen before in person after practice, and we're like, "Is that so and so?" We think so. We mentioned the secondary and Theo Jackson and some of the shaking out there. The other person that we did see yesterday that we hadn't seen last week was Josh Metellus. Though by all of our accounts, we only saw him participating in 11-on-11 work. Yeah. So a very pointed drill. I said, look, if I was only participating in one thing, I would pick 11-on-11. It's the most interesting part of practice. It's the most likely to contribute to team success later on. But certainly interesting that he was only doing one segment of practice and that we hadn't seen him last week.
Yeah, and we don't know this for sure yet, but it's easy to connect the dots there and think, okay, this is a guy in the final year of his contract. There have been conversations about an extension to this point, and I think there's interest certainly from both sides. We'll have to see if they find the common ground on pricing, but I think there's interest from both sides in continuing that relationship, and then he continues to be an important piece of the defense in Minnesota. But as of now, that contract is not done, and I don't think there's really much in terms of guaranteed money for him at this point. So I mean, you do see guys, whether we've seen it with Danielle Hunter or TJ Hawkinson, when they're talking through those contract things, it's maybe not that they're holding out, but the hold in has kind of become the modern approach to this, I guess. And this is still an optional phase of OTAs. So he may be saying, I'm going to be here so I can get my workout bonus, but I'm going to mitigate some of what I do so that I'm not putting myself at more risk when I don't have a guaranteed contract going forward beyond this year. And I want to see something get done. So it's one of those things to keep an eye on. I don't know for sure that that's the only reason for it. I mean, it's possible, I suppose, that he's coming back from something, but yeah, the Occam's razor there would suggest that the contract is at least a factor in some of the way he's going about it in practices that we see, at least to this point.
Well, and it's worth noting that last month or a few weeks ago, Andrew Van Ginkel had his contract extended. They share an agent, Drew Rosenhaus. When Drew was at the facility the day that Andrew Van Ginkel got that extension, and our brains all went first to Josh Metellus and not to Andrew Van Ginkel. So
because they were having Josh talk. So it was like, oh,
yes,
well, now they're gonna, so that was the only reason. But then of course it was Van Ginkel.
And I mentioned it, I
same
think,
agent
during the owners meetings, but Drew Rosenhaus was around. I mean, it was in South Florida, so it's not far for him, but he was around the Vikings owners, or around Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, and I think probably a little bit Kevin O'Connell as well, but he was around the Vikings brain trust a lot that week in Palm Beach. So he had just done the deal with Aaron Jones. Van Ginkel obviously was a point of discussion, and then Josh Metellus as well. So yes, I think there's probably going to be more business there, especially now that the Garrett Bradbury money comes off the books. Now that we're past June 1st, I think it's possible they'll try to get something done with Josh Metellus in the next couple of months here. But yeah, I think all of those things are probably part of the story of why we haven't seen as much of him to this point in OTAs.
Yeah, and it's probably worth noting that he's their biggest contract in terms of player wise left on the table in terms of like the ones that they need to address or probably want to address, obviously with a guy that important. And
the class of 22 isn't going to force a lot of free agent decisions after this year, is it?
No fifth year option questions coming from this beat back in April. I do think though that with Metellus, we hadn't even mentioned, because now that Kwesi's deal got wrapped up, and I don't think we've done a podcast.
No, I was just about to say we haven't talked about that yet.
I buried the lead here. Holy cow.
Yeah, no kidding. Shocker. In case anybody hadn't heard, back on Friday, they announced a new deal getting done with him. But since doing that, I'd imagine Metellus is outside, or Brian Flores, I guess. They got a couple people entering contract years.
Yeah, Brian Flores, Wes Phillips entering contract years. My understanding is there's talks with a couple of those coaches. It sounds like we may hear something in the not too distant future on the Wes Phillips front. But they have some business to do with the coaching staff, and Kwesi gets his done. And as part of that, Ryan Grigson, Demetrius Washington get promoted. Yep. But a long time coming on Kwesi's deal. That was a question that people had been asking quite a bit, including us, throughout the offseason. And the fact that that's done now, that settles a lot of the. They've got the coaching staff, or the head coach and the GM, and a lot of that staff is either has been taken care of or probably will be in the not too distant future here.
Andrew, you also talked to new wide receiver Ty Felton and then wide receivers coach Keenan McCardell yesterday after practice. You're planning to write about both of them. Obviously, don't give away too much, but is there anything that you can kind of tease or share from those conversations?
Yeah, it's interesting to get to know, because I think a lot of what we don't know is so much time is spent studying the players on the field and getting these draft profiles and the strengths and the weaknesses. And what we don't know is what the individual is. What separates a Danielle Hunter from a Scott Crichton is what was inside Danielle Hunter as a 3rd round pick. And with Ty, it's interesting to hear people talk about how this guy's got the talent of a 4-5 star recruit. He was more of a 3 or 4 star because he tears his ACL his junior year of high school, and a lot of offers and schools kind of bailed on him after that. But it took him 5 years to really develop in Maryland, and there were other receivers in front of him, and it was certainly a pipeline that he had to work through. But coaches openly talk about how he can be hard on himself, and he's not the most self-confident at times. And obviously, to be a good wide receiver, you have to have a level of confidence. So this isn't to say he's not a confident person. Yeah. But I was asking Keenan McCardell about Stephon Diggs, because Stephon Diggs was the last Maryland wide receiver drafted by the Vikings, or really the last Maryland player at all before Ty. And I was asking more about the on-field stuff, which is there any kind of comparison or through line you can draw with these two guys coming from a Maryland program where Coach Locksley is the same coach who was also at Maryland at the time as an offensive coordinator? And Keenan just goes, no, they're different. They're different. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And he just goes, Steph is the guy. Steph knows he's the guy. Steph walked onto campus as the guy, and Steph was just born as the guy. Steph knows he's the guy. All those things. And Ty,
country, I think,
needs kind of that nurturing more so, and kind of needs and can get down on himself, and kind of needs that confidence builder. And what the Vikings feel like, and what Mike Locksley in Maryland felt like, is that 2024 season in which he had the program record 96 catches, really blew up, was the guy for Maryland. They felt that has kind of changed his mentality and kind of can serve as a springboard for him into the NFL, where your confidence is going to be tested no matter who you are. So I think that's the fascinating thing with Ty, is we can all talk about he's a rugged catch and run type receiver. He brings a different skill set than Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. People in Maryland will talk about his route running, but when you talk to NFL people about Ty, they say, no, his route running is okay for the NFL. It's more like this is a rugged kid who can create after the catch, where we got guys who can get open downfield. We got guys who can create and catch deep. And Ty's also not the best contested catch guy. He's 6'1", but he doesn't play big above the shoulders. He plays big below the belt, as Keenan McCardell said, which means that we can throw to him down low and he can turn a short hitch route into a 70-yard touchdown. That's the kind of stuff that they felt they were missing in their wide receiver room. And that's kind of what's fascinating about the on-field stuff. But behind the scenes, and how he develops and how he actually contributes could have a large part to do with how they nurture his confidence, and how Keenan kind of coaches him different than he's going to coach a Jordan Addison or a Justin Jefferson. So it'll be fun. I think Vikings fans will have fun watching Ty on the field, and just have a fun time getting to know him, certainly through this story.
Yeah, I feel like we haven't seen too much of him at OTAs yet. Like, there hasn't been a flashy moment from him. So I'm excited to see when that first happens and kind of what that looks like.
Yeah, and he hasn't been getting any first team run or anything, because they've got their top 3 targets back. And it's really been his former Maryland teammate, Ja'Shawn Jones, who was undrafted last year, practice squad guy. He's been getting mixed in with the ones. And this is all under the context of Rondale Moore, a guy they brought in, still isn't practicing. He's off to the side, rehabbing the knee injury. So you're going to get some guys in there, and Ty will develop and maybe get some reps eventually too. But they seem pretty set, at least with the brand new Jalen Naylor and his brand new number 1 with the third receiver.
His bulked up size.
Brand new traps. I mean, he's Jalen Naylor's bigger. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He's spent some time in the weight room, you could tell. And the number is smaller, but the frame filling out is certainly bigger than it was.
All of these guys that we're talking about were at the Unreal Celebrity Softball game last week, put on by the Thielen Foundation, hosted by CJ Ham. We were all out there just kind of for fun, chat everyone up, get some video content. What was everyone's favorite moment from being at that celebrity softball game?
Oh boy. Well, I actually ended up having to leave. So you guys are going to have to highlight me and then set up the highlights on the softball on what actually happened. But just hearing CJ Ham kind of be the face and the voice of this now, because he was a tryout guy in 2016, as we all know, and just kind of a forgotten man. And here he's now head of the Thielen softball tournament. It was just fun to see him.
Another tryout guy.
Another, yeah. But Ben, I heard TJ Hawkinson was putting on a show.
Yeah. I mean, TJ Hawkinson, I'd forgotten, was like a standout youth baseball player in Iowa. And baseball in Iowa obviously is a big thing, and you're playing small town stuff. I think you're playing, it's the typical thing where it's football in the fall, basketball in the winter, baseball in the spring, and I think that was very much his path. And he was a standout down there in Iowa growing up, and it was able to win the home run derby, took the title from Ryan Wright, who had won it the previous year. I think CJ Ham was saying, why does the defense always get the special teams guys? Because the special teams players tend to be pretty good at, as he put it, they all have a special skill somewhere or another. Andrew DiPaolo was the star of this thing a couple of years ago, and then it's been Ryan Wright. So TJ Hawkinson taking the home run derby title back from the specialists was kind of one of the big things of the night. And McCarthy too. I mean, out on the field, everything got delayed for a while because there were storms blowing through that night. So it seemed like everything was probably pushed back an hour or so. But McCarthy seemed to have no concerns about, and it looked no different than we've seen in OTAs. He was moving around quite well and not afraid to sound like he slid into home after scoring from second at one point and was not afraid to put his body on the line a little bit. I'm sure, people with the Vikings would see that and say, not sure we love this, but if he's not thinking about it, it's probably a good sign that it's not really in the back of his mind about the knee injury at this point.
Yeah, McCarthy slid into home plate. I saw a clip of Justin grittying into home plate, which was good because the last play, like I had seen before I left, I stayed the longest and made it through like the first inning, was Justin dropping a ball in the outfield in the first inning for the offense. So I was like, oh, we might have a rough game going for the offense here, but it seems like they found their footing and got there eventually. So again, to tie it back to what we were talking about at the beginning, I think the fact that Justin was there, Jordan Addison came out. He didn't play. He was just getting in street clothes, kind of hanging out. But the fact that those guys, those big names were all there, were having fun with it, were taking the time to really bond with their teammates outside, away from the field, I think all speaks to this kind of effort that it seems the Vikings are having to have everyone so involved in this phase of the offseason and really make sure that they're building up and not just building a ground level for what they're looking to do in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious everything's less plug and play when you have a new quarterback. There's no way around that. Even if he was here a year ago, even if he's been the guy at Michigan, it is different than if it's even Sam Darnold, as new as he was, as a guy that's been in the NFL before, and obviously Kirk Cousins is a veteran starter. Everything just changes when it is a quarterback that you're kind of trying to bring along and bring up. So I think all of these things, how much they matter in the long run, there's no way to quantify that. But the Vikings certainly seem to believe that they do. I mean, we hear a lot of this, pretty much consistently every offseason. And I think the fact that Kevin O'Connell says that J.J. McCarthy is listening, and I think J.J. McCarthy probably believes a lot of those things on his own, but yes, that effort to spend time around your teammates and just build those types of relationships is very much a high value for this organization. And I think those types of nights are, part of how they try to make that happen.
My other favorite moment was Ben giving JJ dad advice, which I'm sure will happen a lot over the next 6 months or so. I think it's
he was now everybody, as Andrew can attest to, when you're becoming a parent, you get a lot of unsolicited dad advice. This actually was not unsolicited. He did ask. He basically said he's asking everybody that he knows for a little bit of advice. So which sounds like the way he studies football too. So we were chatting for a while in the dugout about some of those things, and it was fun to catch up with him a little bit in that regard and kind of just watch him go out on the field after that. But he's seems excited, and it was fun to talk about parenting and what I've learned, what I've done wrong a little bit in 13 years of it. So can share some. Don't be surprised if this goes a little haywire in the first couple of months. That was a lot of my tips. Was don't be surprised if you're kind of all thumbs as a dad for the first time. And it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It doesn't mean the kid doesn't like you. It just means you're new at it, and it's going to take a little time.
As far as life planning goes, JJ really set up quite the fall for himself.
Yeah. It's first year as a starting quarterback is his first year as a dad. So those nights when you're up with a kid, you can get through a lot of, people binge a lot of TV shows when they're doing that, but
Game film, baby.
Extra time for him to go through his playbook and film study, I suppose, when you're up, feeding a baby with a bottle. But he also needs to probably be able to sleep, which will be the challenge.
Yeah,
that kid will probably have watched more game film by age 2 than most people will in their entire life. So
yeah,
we'll see in 30 something when he's high school quarterback somewhere local.
Yeah, when we're writing about that as a 5-star recruit and JJ McCarthy's son somewhere, it's we'll see where that goes. But yes, if they start early, it tends to open some doors.
Well, that's all we have today. We will have a second episode this week with a special guest that I think everyone will want to tune into. We're excited about that. In the meantime, check out all of our work on thestartribune.com and also our colleague Chris Hines' new book, Ant, which is about Timberwolves star Anthony Edwards, that just released today and is available, I think, wherever you get books at this point. So buy it from a local bookseller, not online would be my recommendation there. But thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.